Okay, folks, let's get started. This is The Sky's the Limit, Unlocking the Future of Advanced Air Mobility. And Senator Vandana Slatter, who is from this district, is going to start our session. I'll just say a couple of notes. This is the seventh chapter of our Build Northwest book on trade, transportation, and technology that started yesterday morning and finishes up. There's an economic corridor with Alberta session going on upstairs. And I think our signature event was yesterday when we had the World Shipping Council as our featured speaker. But this one is particularly exciting to me. I'm the opportunity to have a discussion about the importance of regional airports in the Pinwheel region. We're going to talk about that. The WSDOT's Advanced Aviation or Advanced Air Mobility Task Force, which is unique in the country. We're going to talk about that. And I'm not sure if Matt is going to come in and talk about the Sustainable Aviation Fuel initiative that we launched on Monday. But first of all, I'm going to turn it over to the senator because she has been probably with Senator Leas the two most passionate and knowledgeable leaders on aerospace in Washington State. And her commitment to technology in general, but particularly to aviation, is really remarkable. And so I hope you have a couple of opening comments about where you think the state is in terms of its leadership. So, Senator.
Thank you, Bruce. No pressure. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 48th Legislative District in Bellevue. I also wanted to just highlight two of my colleagues who I see in the room. They might not have expected me to highlight them, but I'm Vice Chair of Transportation in the House of Representatives, Representative Brandy Donaghy, and also Senator Lisa Wellman, who chairs education and is also an incredible leader in technology and innovation. So I'm really glad to be joined by, we have an incredible region and incredible legislators that work very well together in this space. So I just wanted to introduce this topic. When I was a kid, the Jetsons, I don't know if you guys remember the Jetsons, made me feel like the future was just around the corner. Flying cars, right? Robot housekeepers, instant everything. And a few years ago, the same excitement sort of buzzed through tech conferences and headlines, right? Flying taxis were coming. Soon, we were told, we'd skip traffic jams, soar above city skylines. But as with many future-focused ideas, the hype got a little ahead of the hard work. Because making advanced air mobility, or AAM, a reality doesn't just mean building sleek, innovative aircraft. It means rethinking infrastructure, rewriting safety standards. It means preparing a skilled workforce and aligning smart policy decisions that position our region and our state as a leader. It means making sure that the benefits of this technology are shared equitably, so that if you live in Bellevue or whether you live in a rural area that's hours away from the nearest hospitals, you still can benefit. What AAM really is an emerging transportation system powered by electric or hydrogen fuel with the potential for quieter, cleaner, more efficient travel. It could connect our remote communities, get life-saving supplies when they're needed fast, and even relieve some pressure off our roads. And yes, one day, even help us with the dreaded airport commute, which some of you have already done coming here. But that future isn't automatic. Washington State's Department of Transportation, in partnership with agencies across our region, from the FAA to small airports, from innovators like Joby and Magniex to city and port leaders, have taken the critical first step, planning. We can dream it, but if we want these new aircraft to land safely and serve real people, then we need infrastructure. Vertiports, charging systems, multimodal connections, air traffic controls. We need public-private partnerships that prepare our workforce for tomorrow's jobs. And we need policy frameworks to ensure this innovation doesn't bypass underserved communities. And asking the hard questions, right? That's what that would do, policy frameworks. It asks, who will this benefit? Who will be left behind? How do we fund this responsibly and sustainably? And how do we get ahead of the emissions, noise, and public trust? This isn't just aviation, right? Today, when we're sitting here thinking about this, this is transportation reimagined for climate, for access, and for resilience. And if we do it right, maybe not overnight, but if we do it right, we can lead, not only nationally, but globally. We can build a regional AAM ecosystem that reflects our values, sustainability, safety, equity, and innovation, of course. So yes, the Jetsons got us dreaming, but now it's time to build thoughtfully, together. And we are all very lucky today to be able to hear from an incredible panel, to hear how far we've come and the steps going forward. So I'm going to pass it over to an amazing leader in this work, Yolanda Wolf, who will help us lift off into a great session. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Slatter. It's such an honor to be able to do this in your district. Really pleased to be here. My name is Yolanda Wolf. I am the Executive Director of CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative. Before I start with a little bit more introduction, I have a job for you. I put a poll in Whova. So if you haven't figured out Whova by now, it's time. Go to Whova, open the app, open this session, and the first thing that will pop up is a poll. And when I'm finished with my little bit right here, we'll see what the poll says. Also, feel free to add questions into Whova. We're going to have a Q&A and discussion at the end. We have some prepared questions, but we also want to hear from you. So just a note about CAMI, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to support the sustainable and responsible integration of advanced air mobility into transportation systems through education, communication, consulting, and collaboration. So we're a virtual organization, but I'm based on Bainbridge Island, so we work nationally and internationally, but I always love it when I'm in the Pacific Northwest. At the end of our session, I will give you some links to our website and some resources that we have prepared. But generally, we work with the various stakeholders, especially agencies, airports, government officials, elected officials, planners, to understand what advanced air mobility is and think about it as a mode in a transportation system. Let's see, you'll have to bear with us in order to avoid this all the time. We're going to use this as a small confidence monitor, but we've got to make these slides work together. Okay, so let's back up for just a sec and say, what do we mean by advanced air mobility? So advanced air mobility, or AAM, as you'll hear us call it, is a broad concept, and it focuses on emerging aviation markets and use cases for urban, suburban, and rural operations. The objective of AAM is to move people and cargo between places more effectively, especially in currently underserved local, regional, urban, and rural environments. So the aircraft are part of advanced air mobility, but often advanced air mobility gets conflated with the aircraft. It's more than just the aircraft. Let's talk about those aircraft, though. What do we mean by this? Over the last 5 to 10 years, we have seen a confluence of new technologies, including electric and hybrid electric propulsion, new materials, increasing automation, different ways of different kinds of propulsion that have allowed the development of new configurations of aircraft. So there are hundreds of different aircraft in development in varying stages, including within a year or two of certification by the FAA. There are thousands of flight hours now recorded with these aircraft. They vary in size and configuration, but a lot of them are in the 2 to 7 to 9 passenger range, though there are certainly companies like Airbus that are working on larger commercial aircraft. They vary in range. They may go short distances, 50 miles, they may go several hundred miles or more. And a lot of that depends on their configuration, their propulsion. They vary in fuel types. Some of these are battery, some may be powered by hydrogen fuel cells, some are hybrid. And they vary in their levels of automation. And you will hear from one of our speakers today about the company that he works for that is working directly towards automation. But what's important is to understand that these new aircraft will enable us to use mobility through the air to move people and goods through an integrated, connected multimodal transportation network in a way we have not been able to before. So what are some of the potential benefits? Well, I think certainly in this region, one of the top ones is natural disaster and emergency response. When you think about the challenges we have here, both in terms of volcanic activity, earthquakes, fires, sometimes ground transportation fails us. And being able to get first responders being to the site, being able to get people out is a very important public service use case. In addition to that, non-emergent medical transportation is another important use case. Moving beyond that, looking at reconnecting communities, especially smaller rural communities that in the past have been connected through aviation, but have lost those connections. As you'll hear, we have, I think, close to 150 airports just in the state of Washington, and we only use a handful of them. So we already have existing infrastructure in small communities, and I'm going to let Brandon talk more about the opportunities to use that existing infrastructure to connect rural communities with each other, to connect them with urban centers, and to eliminate transportation deserts. Then finally, I should say next to last, is using the electrification of aviation in conjunction with the broader electrification of transportation. And what we do know is that though different modes of transportation are very different, electrons are electrons. And being able to produce electricity, store it, and use it to power transportation modes is something we can all work on together. And then finally, there are economic opportunities and workforce development opportunities. Senator Slatter mentioned these that come with the development of this new form of transportation, both within the industry and secondary and tertiary effects of increasing mobility for people. However, there are some concerns and we need to be mindful of them. So as we have done this work over the last number of years, talking to communities, talking to stakeholders, talking to local officials, this is a collection of some of the categories of concerns that have come out. So certainly concerns with flight paths, with privacy, with noise, with air congestion, concerns around what we call the vertiports, the places where some of these aircraft will land, including environmental impacts and social and economic impacts. Service characteristics. I think we can all say what we're not looking to do is put a bunch of money in so a few rich people can fly up to the San Juans. So we need to make sure that this can be affordable and accessible. And finally, some of the other cross-cutting issues like the questions of allocation of public resources. Before I turn it over to our expert panelists, I want to share with you 3 concepts. Nobody told me I wasn't advancing the slides. I'm advancing them here. Bruce, that's your job from now on. It's hard to remember to advance both. Okay, sorry, that was the aircraft. And I think these slides will be shared, won't they, Bruce? The potential benefits we talked about. I don't need to go over these again, the concerns, but actually these diagrams are helpful. So the 3 concepts, and yell at me if I forget to change the slide. The first is the idea of a technology push versus market pull. So most of us remember about 2 decades ago, these things showed up. And we thought, cool new technology. Don't think I need it, but it's a fun way to make a phone call. Making phone calls is the last thing we do with this now. We do all kinds of other things. That's a technology push market. The technology showed up, and then we collectively have developed all these other uses for it. Versus a market pull, which is when technology is developed in response to an articulated customer need. Advanced air mobility is a tech push market. So we have the technology and we have this opportunity now to consider this technology and what we can do with it to help serve communities, to enable them to benefit from economic growth, transportation needs. So we need to think about what needs could we address with this technology and how can it contribute to the overall transportation system. The second concept to think about is the convergence of distinct disciplines. When we think about transportation, ground transportation, typically we think about those modes as interacting. Buses and taxis meet people at light rail stations. Cars, buses, transit, light rail, even ferries. I live on Bainbridge Island. I take the ferry all the time. I have to coordinate on both ends with some form of next mode. Aviation historically has lived in its own silo as a form of transportation. For advanced air mobility to be successful, it needs to integrate. So we have in the one big bubble, all of the people, agencies, industries that have been involved with aviation that typically have not worked with local communities, short of communities that are dealing with an actual airport. We have the same situation on the regulatory front, where we have aviation, which is almost exclusively federal law, versus land use planning, which is almost exclusively local. So we're having to converge these very distinct disciplines when it comes to aviation. We'll hear more about that from Lisa as she talks about planning. And the final concept is sustainable mobility. So the definition of sustainable mobility is meeting the mobility needs of current generations without reducing the mobility needs of future generations. So when we think about advanced air mobility, we need to think about how it sustainably fits into the larger mobility picture. So with that, I'm going to throw out a few of these observations for you to think about as you listen to our panelists. There are a number of keys that to successful implementation of advanced air mobility. The main one, and Senator Slatter mentioned this, is that there are broad public benefits, both direct and indirect. What do I mean by that? I mean that not everyone may fly in an air taxi, but if by developing connections to other modes, we increase the level of service of public transportation generally, we're benefiting the public by making more connections, by making mobility easier. That's one example. So we need to define the roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders. We need to look at AAM in the context of a multimodal transportation system and at a regional level, which is why this conference is such an important venue to talk about this. We need to think about the electrical and energy need, because energy, even in the Pacific Northwest, is a limited resource. We need to assess those disparate impacts and make sure that we are balancing benefit and impact. We need to provide coordination and, very importantly, funding for regional planning to incorporate this into transportation and utility systems. And we need to engage with stakeholders in the public. You didn't tell me that at least I was speaking that one. So with that, I am going to quickly look at your poll and see what you all have said. The question in the poll was, have you heard of advanced air mobility before you walked in this room? Let's see. I have 15 of 19 said yes, and 4 of 19 said no. Great. That's great to know. I spoke to a room of 400 planners in North Carolina last year from around the state, and probably 10 out of the 400 had heard of advanced air mobility. So good job. Okay, I am going to now stand here. I'm going to turn it over to, let me quickly introduce to you our panelists. We have, sorry, I'm going to go back. Working different pieces of equipment here. So we have 3 panelists today. The first panelist is Amelia Marchand, who is the Director of Ecosystem Partnerships at Wisk, which is a Boeing company. Amelia is going to be here remotely, and I'm going to stand here just to advance his slides. Amelia, hello.
Hello, hello. Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Let me just quickly introduce the other panelists, and then we'll just roll from one to the next. Our second speaker will be Brandon Rakes, who is the Airport Director at Chehalis Centralia Airport. And our third speaker is Lisa Harmon, who's a project planner in aviation at Mead and Hunt. So Amelia, I'm going to turn this mic off, and you tell me when to advance your slides.
Great. Thanks, Yolanka. And I won't be able to see, so I'll probably see the number of the slide as well, because on my screen I can't see which one you're on. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me. Unfortunately, I couldn't be present in person, but I'm really happy to be here with you and to share the stage with the senator and other panelists that I've worked with for a couple of years. And you, Yolanka, obviously, we've known each other well now for a few years. So my name is Emilia Marchand. I am the Director of Ecosystem Partnerships at Wisk Aero. As Yolanka said, we are a now wholly owned subsidiary of the Boeing company, essentially Boeing's bet in this space. And the aircraft you see here on this first slide, this is our Gen 6 aircraft. I'll go through the generations a little bit later, but the one we are certifying with the FAA and bringing to market. So it's a self-flying aircraft. It's autonomous with human in the loop. I'll get back to that later. So 4 passengers in this aircraft, and you see 6 propellers, tilt propellers at the front, and six propellers at the back as well, and a 50-foot wingspan that allows it to take off and land vertically, and then fly efficiently like an aircraft with this big wingspan. So if you go to the next slide, why, Yolanka talked about it already before, why we need to do this is we need more ways of transit, more transportation solutions in the quiver of transportation planners, and we can't keep on building roads. I think there's a great study that Texas A&M does every year, where by measuring the hours lost in congestion in certain metros, and there's a number that can be associated with the loss of productivity of people in traffic, that represents the loss of productivity when you tally that up at the end of the year. And so for the whole US, that was $70.4 billion. And so how can we alleviate that, or how can we contribute to a more productive future and mobility across the region? So if you go to the next slide. So our vision: create a future where air travel that elevates people, community, and aviation. As Yolanka said, our goal is really to bring If you go to the next slide, their mission to deliver safe everyday flight for everyone. And we think autonomy is really the key technology to scale this industry, which will create more jobs and also give more and more people the ability to fly, and go from A to B really efficiently. Autonomy, as I'll get to it later, by allowing scale and these economies of scale, we're also going to allow for the price point of these trips to be reduced and have more people access it. So if you go to the next slide, I was mentioning we are a Boeing company. The company started in 2011 when one of the co-founder of Google decided to create a company to develop these aircrafts. And then you'll see a couple of slides later. And then in 2019, Boeing decided to, seeing the fifth prototype, a two-seater demonstrator, electric VTOL aircraft and autonomous, saw an opportunity to enter this market, but also continue developing autonomy technology to apply that on the rest of the product suite of the company. And so we're about 800 people, done over 1,700 full-scale successful autonomous test flights. And the last bit of the story, so the joint venture was created in 2019, and then in 2023, Boeing decided to fully acquire, so bought out Google and made us a wholly owned subsidiary. And now there's another company named SkyGrid that is working on the traffic management system and autonomous traffic management system to really fully integrate all these aircrafts, drone, eVTOLs, autonomous, piloted, and really create the safe ATC system of the future. And so that company based in Austin, who was also a Boeing joint venture, now has become a subsidiary of Wisk. So trying to really integrate and really chart the future of tomorrow. So if you go to the next slide. This shows you a little bit of a footprint in Australia. So the legacy of how the company was created, we were doing test flights in New Zealand and had a team in Australia. And we've announced a partnership with Brisbane as one of the launch city also outside of the US in 2032 to be the partner of the Olympic Games. So this shows you we're headquartered in California, which is where we're currently having most of our engineering and producing our initial aircraft. If you go to the next slide, this just shows you what I was mentioning before. So starting in 2011, building autonomous eVTOLs. So we've been at it for a while. It's not as long as the Jetsons had been invented, but quite close. And so as I was mentioning, when we got to the Generation 5, that's when Boeing decided to step in and become a partner in this venture. And so going to the next slide. This is the aircraft I was describing. So you see now having the pylons here on the side of the wing, the propellers at the back and the propellers at the front. This technology, distributed electric propulsion, is also one of the key elements making these aircraft safe. So we're designing this aircraft to the same level of safety as a commercial aircraft, so 10 to the -9. So this would be the safest mode of transport that exists, so similar to commercial aviation today. I know, like lately, there's been incidents in the news, but again, comparing to driving to work, trains, etc., by far, airplanes are the safest mode of transport. And these ones, moving folks and cargo in our metro above us, obviously safety is non-negotiable. The other two key elements, really, what we're tackling with eVTOLs is two of the knocks on our industry, which have been emission and noise. And so this aircraft is fully electric, battery powered, and they are designed to be extremely quiet, significantly quieter than a helicopter. Takeoff and landing are the noisiest phases. And then as you transition to forward flight, there's actually a lot less energy that's required thanks to that 50-foot wingspan. And so, at 1,500 feet, you would see the aircraft. It'd be a small dot, but you wouldn't distinguish the noise from the ambient noise around you. And also the blades are designed so that not only the noise level is reduced a lot, but also as there's a helicopter flying over me in San Francisco right now, you probably can't hear it. But also the shape of the sound is made such that it's a lot easier on the ears, on human ears, compared to helicopter blades. So 90 miles plus reserve. Typically, the missions we're looking at is, think of your region, so between 20 and 40 miles is really what already makes a dent on the journey and reducing a journey drastically. So if you go to the next slide, I'll make sure I'll don't take the time from all the panelists. I'll go quick. So one thing that's really important for us, making sure that we talked about equity in transportation, obviously economic equity, and I was mentioning how autonomy is going to be a big element of that, but also equity of access. We want to make sure that our aircraft is obviously ADA compliant, but is the most seamless mode of transport for people with disability. We do a lot of testing, including if you on the next slide, somebody visually impaired. Hearing that how when people, blind people take commercial, or her experience, I shouldn't generalize, but going to a commercial aircraft, and then she gets sat down and then just keeps her hands to herself, not having any cues, not knowing where things are. And so we're working hard on that to make sure that also somebody who's blind getting the aircraft would have the same experience as anybody. And so if you go to the next slide, so why autonomy? So I was mentioning distributed electric propulsion is key in the safety of these aircraft. So, an electric motor is much simpler than a turbo engine in a helicopter, and much less likely to fail, requires less maintenance. Even if one would fail with distributed electric propulsion and redistributing the power, you can fly nominal mission losing one or two engines, which have probability of less than 1 in a billion to happen, and I'm sure the math is actually even more than that. So this also helps with scalability issues. So if you need a pilot in every aircraft versus having the ability to have a human in the loop in a fleet operations center managing a fleet on routes from A to B, in our case, that will be more of like a gondola in the sky, if you will. So we'll go from A to B. It'll be always the same trip for the air traffic controller on this specific route, and then having the ability to manage a fleet now and not having a pilot in every aircraft really allows you to scale. I'm sure both on reducing the operating cost and passing that down to consumers and making the trip cheaper and growing the demand that way. But also, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced delays in a plane or to take a flight because some personnel wasn't there. There were some pilots that were missing or coming or delayed or etc. And so when we think of the scale and tempo that we want to have for these aircrafts, this will be the case as well. So really not having that bottleneck is going to be key, and simpler maintenance. And so finishing quickly on my last two slides, three slides. So I'll go quickly on this one because Yolanka actually said it in great ways. So improving mobility, really supporting without having to build too much costly infrastructure, since we only need a rather small area to take off and land, being able to efficiently connect a region that in some cases also has some geographical bottleneck, your region in the Pacific Northwest, which by the way, I love. I'm in the fog in San Francisco right now, and I haven't seen the sun in a week. And so I wish I could be with you. But it's really going to help with connectivity, workforce, and education opportunities as well. I mean, there are some studies that expect that in 10 years, the industry will have generated 280,000 jobs in the US alone, and generate over $100 billion in revenue, annual revenue. So there's a lot of this industry is really going to be a revolution in our space, and really excited and charting the way to sustainable mobility and sustainable mobility in aerospace. If you go to the next slides, just showing you the markets that we've announced in the US: Houston, LA, Orange County, and Miami. I was mentioning Brisbane before, and in Japan. Obviously, our intention is to have a service in many cities as we grow, and so we are excited to continue engaging with your region. Obviously, having Boeing as our parent company, being such a great player in your region, and just showing you the last slide. As we look at demand modeling, and this is just for the air taxi use case, Yolanka, and I'm sure we'll get into it, mentioned there's lots of other use cases, but looking at what 10 vertiports where would they be placed in the region based on the mobility demand that we see, that we get from cell phone data and traffic data and etc. And so this would be optimally placed based on our algorithm. Like obviously you see wait and see tech at the bottom or close to. Where would be the trips? Where would be ideally positioned so that we could capture as many trips as possible? Where going from A to B versus doing it in a car, you go to the vertiport, then you fly the longer leg, and then you do your last bit of the trip and save at least 20% or more time compared to what you do on the ground. And so these are the numbers that you see there with 10 vertiports, almost 500,000 daily addressable market. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to service this, but uh, with an average flight of 10 minutes, you have almost 500,000 people every day who would save 20% or more of their total travel time by using AAM. And you see on the top right, like a pretty even distribution. So there's a lot of demand throughout the day, which is very encouraging also for the region. So that's it. Thank you very much. And you have my last slide, my contact, please. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Milia. And we'll call you back up when we get to Q&A. Our next speaker is Brandon from Chehalis Centralia Airport. I can say that.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing today? So it's been a very long conference, but a lot of good information so far. So the presenters that went before me pretty much wrapped it all up. So I really don't have that much more to talk about. Really what I would like to do now is tell you a little bit about our process and really kind of give you an example of what does advanced air mobility look like at a general aviation airport. And because when we talk about some of these concepts, there's a lot of different applications, but what does it look like in day-to-day life? So starting in 2023, we did an update to our airport master plan. So our airport master plan is really an opportunity for us to envision what is our airport going to look like in 20 years? How do we want to get there? And let's build that plan along the way. The timing of this was, I think, perfect when it comes to technology, because as we look at where we're at with advanced air mobility and regional air mobility, it gave us an opportunity to really look at the role of our airport in our community and imagine how can it be better suited to serve our community. So I'll start with where is the Chehalis Centralia Airport. So we are a big airport for a little airport, but we're little for a big airport. So we have good bones, good infrastructure. We have a solid runway, 5,000 feet long by 140 feet wide. We are right off I-5. As you guys can't quite see in this picture, but I'll show you a picture here in just a moment. But we're right off I-5 and right between Seattle and Portland. So we are really ideally located to access the Seattle and Portland markets if we had an affordable way that we could integrate into the system. And that is what advanced air mobility does for us. So when we look at this map, you'll see that there are some distance rings on here. So when we look at 100 miles, so from Chehalis, how far would 100 miles get us? Well, that would get us all the way to the Olympic Peninsula. That would get us nearly to Canada. 200 miles, definitely up there. And then as we start expanding that number out. So today, when we look at advanced air mobility, and we look at the range of some of these aircraft, you're going to see some aircraft that are tailored more toward the urban environment, and they'll be doing shorter trips, multiple shorter trips. But then you have some aircraft that are tailored more for I'll describe it as a regional air mobility system. So accessing your more rural airports and accessing those other markets. And so for us, being under 100 miles to get all the way north of Seattle, all the way south of Portland, I think we're in a great location there. So the next slide shows how close we are to I-5 and what did we imagine for our airport. So I-5, you can see on the bottom of that page, you're basically, I would say, about a half a mile off of I-5 to get to where we are envisioning an advanced air mobility terminal. And And so if you look on the northeast corner, you can see how we are trying to connect this as a multimodal hub. Another thing that came out of doing our master plan is we're doing a hydrogen multimodal hub feasibility study. And that's really the main reason why I'm at this conference as well, is to gain a lot of information there. But we're looking at how can we integrate this advanced air mobility into our existing terrestrial networks that are there. Because in aviation, we've been trying to solve it for a long time, but how do we get the last mile in aviation? It's really easy for you guys to fly from wherever you're from, whether it's in Edmonton, Canada, or whether it's somewhere south of here. It's really easy to get into SeaTac, but how do you get from SeaTac to here? And so we started trying to look at how do we close that last mile gap. And advanced air mobility, I believe, is one of the tools that we can use to help make that smaller, so that gap closes up. So if we look at our airport, I'll walk you through some of the design here. So we'll look at the northeast corner, because that's really what we're focused on in this layout. And you can see a hydrogen development area. And you can see a development area that's 12.3 acres that's identified on this. That's the area that we're looking at for advanced air mobility, and that being a multimodal hub. So if you look, you can see how that road loops in, wraps around, and then goes right back out to I-5. So very easy in and out traffic. I do have some more detailed photos, but I don't believe I have any of them here well, I do have one that's a little bit better that'll show you in a little more detail. So let me go to that slide now. So if we look at that road and how it wraps around, you can see how we're envisioning the fueling area for hydrogen, maybe production, distribution, consumption, all of that there. But we'll also have electrification. You can see the parking area. We're talking about microgrids and battery storage. You can see where we've got parking areas lined up, and then that flow through for traffic. So if we are utilizing systems like, what's the name of the autonomous car that Waymo. So if we're looking at Waymo, sorry, I drew that blank there. But if we're looking at systems like Waymo, even if we're looking at using our local transit, Lewis Transit is not far from us, and they're using hydrogen fuel cell buses or have access to them, and they're building a hydro laser. So even if they're going to utilize this infrastructure, very easy in and out for our customers. But it connects us to those big markets. So we want to really make this a seamless multimodal hub. So I want to not miss some of the things here, because I've got a lot of talking points I want to cover. But the reason why this is important for our airport, advanced air mobility gives us a tool for us to connect to these other markets. When we talk about Lewis County, which is where I'm from, we always talk about our youth being the greatest export from our community. With a tool like advanced air mobility, if we have affordable access to those other markets, we can then access those with our youth. So the youth can graduate from the schools. They don't have to move to Seattle or Portland. They don't have to leave that community. So we capture that segment, keep them in our community. But now we've got access to, say, Redmond dollars in Lewis County. So the economic impact of this would be massive. So if we look at our median household income and where it's at right now, very, very low. But our quality of life is very high. So what if we can blend that a little bit by bringing some income into our community from outside by using tools like advanced air mobility? So that's a little bit of our why there. I know I've strayed from my talking points a little bit here. And then I'll just kind of wrap up by showing you a little bit of where we are at in the journey, just so you understand this process. Yolanda talked about, or maybe it was the senator talked about, that this is not going to be an overnight thing. It is coming. It will happen much faster than I think a lot of people realize, but it's going to take time. So if we look at where are we at in our journey. So this map here does a really good job of laying it out. I know some of the print's a little bit small. So if you have questions after the presentation about where we're at, how the process is going, I'm happy to talk about that. But we've already received an industrial site readiness grant. We received a innovative finance asset concession grant that's funding our multimodal hub feasibility study. So we're working on that. But right now, a lot of what we're doing is paper and pixels is the way I've been describing it to everybody. But where we need to get to next is actual implementation. So we're doing the hard part right now. And I think that's where a lot of people that are working on this are at, to put in this infrastructure. We've got to get through those initial steps, but then now we need to start actually investing in the actual infrastructure that we need that is so important. The good news is I believe we can take a phased approach to the installation of infrastructure for these aircraft. We have roughly 130 public use airports within the state of Washington. That's great infrastructure that's there already. If we add something as simple as electrification to our airports, now we've got a base level of service that we can provide to communities throughout the state, the region. And then as we start advancing to hydrogen later on, then we can build off of that electrical infrastructure that's already been put in place. So that's a little bit about our airport and a little bit about the why for advanced air mobility. So I'll turn it over to the next. Actually, I'll let you introduce our next speaker here. But thank you very much. And I am happy to talk about this in more depth in the Q&A here and afterwards. So.
Thanks, Brandon. And now we'll have Lisa Harmon from Mead and Hunt come up for her presentation.
Thanks, Yolanda. I really appreciate that I'm following Brandon here, because one of the things we have to say is, what do we need to do to make this happen? And there are a lot of steps we have to do, but I think one of the great things is we still have a little time. We have time as aircraft are getting certified to get ready for their operation. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, how do we do that? How do we make our system physically ready? Where are the connections? And what are the things we need to do in terms of policy and legislation? And the data I'm going to share with you today comes out of 2 state AAM system plans that we recently completed. As Yolanda said, I'm with the firm of Mead and Hunt, and we led the AAM plan for California recently and for the state of Washington. So I've tailored what I'm going to say to be about the state of Washington and what we learned during that plan development. So let's move ahead. So one of the things that I always like to point out is that AAM is kind of a new transportation mode, but some of it's not so new either. It's a subsector of aviation, and we figured how to make aviation work. We can figure out how to make AAM work as a subset of aviation. And we always talk about AAM. We think about those eVTOL aircraft. They go up and down. They're at places that are at vertiports or kind of like heliports. But AAM is really so much more. We don't want to overlook those other things. It also includes the electrification of existing aircraft. Making regional aircraft have electric motors or hydrogen powered. So we call that CTOL, conventional takeoff and landing. It includes STOL, that the military has used for years, but now let's make it electric. That's short takeoff and landing aircraft. They might need 500 feet or 300 feet rather than a whole runway. So we can make those aircraft electric too. And then we talk about the VTOL, which are sort of a combination of helicopter and fixed wing that go up and down without a runway at all. So we need to remember that AAM is a bigger picture than some of the materials that we see that are envisioning just eVTOL aircraft. So as Emilian said, the great thing about it is that we see sustainability benefits. We see about quieter aircraft. We talk about new vertiports, which are kind of like heliports, but not exactly, because we need new equipment to modify them so that they can support hydrogen or electricity. And then the big thing is that it's all about zero emissions. So moving right along, sorry about that. So what are the things we can do to make ourselves ready? I think we all know, start with what you know. So we can start at airports and heliports that we have now. Let's modify our existing infrastructure rather than building brand new stuff. And at the beginning, I think most people will agree, as Emilian was saying, that when we start AAM operations, it's quite likely that at least one portion of a trip will begin or end at an airport. So let's think about, how do AAM and OEM manufacturers integrate into our airport communities? We need to teach them about how airports operate, and we need to educate airports about how this new technology operates. So we need to think about that. And then we need to think about how vertiports are different from what we have. We need to think about, the charging infrastructure, the parking sort of things. We need to think about how does this fit into the multimodal transportation stuff that already happens at an airport. So I just wanted to go over these use cases in case you haven't heard them, but I'm sure you have, or at least many of us have. When we think of urban air mobility or air mobility, we think about that air taxi use case. But that's not all it is. We can think about on-demand use, but we can also think about regional air mobility, like Brendan was just talking about. But one thing that is often overlooked, and I think that we need to keep our eyes open for, are for cargo and freight connections as well. There's a firm out there called Pipistrel that's made these aircraft that are AAM. They're totally electric powered, and they can carry about 1,500 or 1,600 pounds of cargo. Now, granted, that's not a lot of cargo, but with zero emissions and you're making multiple trips a day, you can handle those special kind of pieces of cargo that may be of higher value and that you need to move quickly and you don't want to put in a truck. So we need to think about cargo, we need to think about regions, and we need to think about urban. So when I think about AAM opportunities, as Yolanda said, we're thinking about increased opportunities for the public. And that can be in terms of how they get to and from the airport. It can be how they get to and from home, and it can be getting trucks off the road. So there are lots of different use cases that we need to think about. And AAM, whoops, thank you. Use cases, benefits. Sorry about that. Multitasking. All right. Like multimodal. So we can think about how we can help. And again, one thing that I didn't mention is enhanced first response activities. When we think about AAM and big things like fires that we've been vulnerable to, I'm not suggesting exactly that we want new people fighting those fires, but we can help them. We can rotate crews in and out to the site of a fire. We don't have to get involved in mucking up the airspace near it, but we can certainly help get people to and from and help do evacuation as necessary from adjacent to the fire. So we need to involve our emergency management agencies in this discussion too. Yeah. And I kind of like this slide. It's too many words, and I apologize for that. But the thing that I wanted to really talk about is that AAM will be on a scale. And when we start at the beginning, it's where we are now. We're emerging. We have aircraft that are being tested. And we see this happening for the next couple of years. And for the next 5 years, what we can do is get ready for those aircraft when they come online. In 5 to 10 years, we see that there's going to be multiple kinds of AAM uses. And then in the long term, what's envisioned is that operations would expand to more and more locations as we move forward. So emerging, what we're doing is adapting our existing infrastructure. As we grow, we'll create even more infrastructure and greater number of connections. And as we mature, we'll begin to see AAM operating more and more and more. So we'll have expanded markets, expanded infrastructure, and increased automation. So the good news is that we have time to plan, but we got to do it now. All right. So the key topics that we talked about when we were doing planning for the state of Washington were about infrastructure readiness and multimodal integration. We wanted to think about what we had to do to make our communities ready and to garner a workforce and put a workforce in place. And of course, community outreach. I'm going to focus my comments on infrastructure readiness and policy. So moving right along. Infrastructure readiness. One of the key takeaways we had from the Washington plan was that to be effective, AAM is not a standalone mode of transportation. It's a supplemental mode. It's a subset of aviation, and it needs to be connected to other modes. So what do we do first? We looked at the Washington State Transportation Plan and said, what does our system have now? What are the goals of that system? Because it knows what it needs to be successful. And how do we look at AAM as a solution to some of the challenges in that plan? how can we enhance connectiveness and the choices that the people of Washington have when they need to get from point A to point B or transfer goods? So I want to just go over at the speed of heat a discussion of the Washington transportation system. As you know, as we just pointed out, and as Brandon said, Washington is benefited by an incredibly robust and diverse transportation system. More than 130 airports. We have strong intermodal transport facilities with airports. The West Coast has this way more than a lot of other states because we have international connections and we need to talk and we need to transfer to seaports. And there are efforts underway to link transportation to hydrogen and electricity. There are lots of highways that already have electric and hydrogen pumps nearby. Brandon's working on getting clean energy at his airport. So just to reiterate the key takeaway, AAM will likely begin using existing infrastructure, and we have a robust aviation system to support that. It will need modification, but we have the nuts and bolts in place. So let's talk about freight rail. The state has 3,000 miles of track that it does not own, but it does own the stations adjacent to the track, to those tracks. We have lots of air cargo and freight transport intermodal facilities right now. We have marine ports. The cool thing about a lot of marine ports is that they already have airports. That's very cool. We have a system for intermodal connections, and there's no reason that AAM can't capitalize on that. We don't need to reinvent the system, but we can supplement it. So we already have features for cargo transport in place that we can build upon. And then we talk about people in transit. We have one of the greatest ferry systems in the world, but it is aging and it does need infrastructure. How can AAM be integrated into that? I would submit there are a couple of ways. When we were looking at the ferry system in Washington, we found out we had excess real estate. There are piers that could be available and used for vertiport development in the future. That was pretty cool. But we can also think, thank you. Oh, I'm back. Sorry. I get excited and then I don't click. I'm so sorry. So when we get to those, when we have those rail intermodal facilities, we also have people moving facilities. We have a ferry system that has a growing ridership and again, an aging fleet. And we have real estate that we might be able to use for AAM and vertiport development. That's pretty cool. We also have a robust public transit system. How do we take AAM and use it to amend these systems? Perhaps offset or supplement them during non-key working hours. For example, if you use the ferry system without a car and you need to get home early, maybe AAM is a way that could supplement that system during non-peak hours. There are lots of different possibilities. But again, we need to use it to supplement what we have for those first and last mile needs. And then highways. And this is the really frustrating part, as Yolanda said, cars, surface transportation bill, airplanes, aviation bill, they don't talk to each other, but there are so many opportunities that we could have. Washington, with its interstate highways and its links to ports, has a robust system. And the thing about highways that we don't think about with aviation is that they do take people where they need to go. Some people use them for visual navigation. In Washington, we see that our highways bring us from east to west and west to east, but highways also have fuel infrastructure. There are electric and hydrogen connections for fueling already along our major highways. And highways also support communication infrastructure, which will be critical to the implementation of AAM. Communication infrastructure as well as energy structure is a key component. So our takeaway is that why not think about co-locating AAM in our highway system in terms of emergency response or in terms of using it as a place to stage aircraft in the event of an emergency. That's what a new case for rest stops, that are many of which already provide fuel. So I did it right that time. Oh no, I didn't. That's our, sorry about that, you guys. So anyway, illustration, highway system, rest stops, existing infrastructure. Okay, now we'll move along. So I wanted to bring this particular case up was because for part of our planning for the statewide plan, we came up with, we called notional stations. Where are places we could think about putting vertiports? And the reason they're notional is because we wanted to see what we were going to come up against. So we said, let's look at Everett Station. It's already busy. There's a train there. Maybe we could get from an airport to the train station. From nearby Payne Field, it's an air taxi place. It could provide, commuter connectivity. Great, let's look at it. Is there space to put a vertiport near Everett Station? So thank goodness for GIS, we found out there was. And so we said, this is a great place to put a vertiport. It's about the size we need. Let's just draw it in and say, what if? And I want to accentuate, this is a what if exercise. We said, if they have this big parking lot, maybe we could use that. It's already owned by a public agency. And then we said, what's nearby? Because we wanted to look at the land use question. For years, we've tried not to put stuff that would, new land uses in places where they would affect airports. But now we essentially want to put little mini vertiports in places with existing land uses. So we're taking that land use equation that we've grown up with for the past 50 years and using it in reverse. So when we looked at our notional location here, we had lots of space to build our vertiport. We've got connections. We went, oh, there's a daycare center within 100 feet of this parking lot. Do we want to put a vertiport within 100 feet? Let's think about that. And then we said, oh, there's a K through 12 school that's within a quarter mile. There's an apartment building with 800 feet. There's a church within 1,500 feet. I am not saying these aren't things we can't think about. And I'm not saying, oh, this would never work. But I'm saying we need to think about these things. And so our notional exercise got us into the mode of saying, how do we address land use? But we looked at the zoning and the land use for the jurisdiction and they said, yeah, this is consistent with our comprehensive plan. This is, it's terrific, but we looked at it and we said it's not consistent with aviation compatible use goals. So our takeaways were that we need to look for available space and facilities, and we need to be consistent with what's going on in the, in the environment and the use of the land. But we need to also think about those new challenges that we haven't faced before. We're not saying we can't overcome them. We're just saying, oh, got to think about that. So how do we get there? We know we have infrastructure. We know this is possible, but how do we figure out what to do when we try to take AAM and achieve system-wide transportation goals? We figured out we need to have new regulations at the state level, and we need to identify gaps in regulations and policies. So FAA has lots of new policies coming out. The last Surface Transportation Bill was very supportive of AAM. So we need to take those federal policies, incorporate them into our state policies, and then come up with regulations and policies for our local jurisdictions, because I would bet that most jurisdictions don't know about siting aviation facilities within their boundaries. So we got to help them figure out how to do that. So in the case of Washington, we need to incorporate AAM into the Growth Management Act and the comprehensive planning policies and regulations that have come out of the Growth Management Act. We need to teach our local jurisdictions, our counties and cities, what does AAM mean? What is it? Not what you think it is, not the folklore, but the fact, what is it? And how are we going to pay for it? Because they're going to be making the decisions about whether or not to approve a new vertiport within their boundaries. So in terms of the regulatory framework, in our case, we need to look at the revised Code of Washington. We need to incorporate language about vertiports. I looked in the state code and the ordinances, and none of them use the word vertiport yet. We got to get that in there. We need to talk about how we're going to pay for overdoing some of our guidance. So this is a great example of the types of regulations and guidance that we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about the revised code. We, in our case, it includes 2 titles. We need to be thinking about how do we evaluate vertiports and AAM in terms of environmental. It's a different kind of noise. The old models for noise evaluation won't work. The way we look at land use changes. So we need to come up with new language so we can update these existing pieces of regulation. All right. So we were talking about a vision. WashDOT has a vision for AAM, and this is what it is. They want to provide new technology to supplement the existing system. We've talked about that, and they want it to operate seamlessly. So the first thing you have to do is have a vision, and this is the state's vision. So the next thing we need to do is come up with a policy roadmap. So our policy roadmap for incorporating AAM has to do a couple of things. Like I said, don't start from scratch. Build on what you have. Consider what you need to do in the system already. And know that whatever you do, it's going to have to be flexible. Policy has to be general because we don't have the vehicles yet. We have some that are soon to be certified by FAA, but we don't have them yet. And new vehicles could have lots of different configurations. And we also need to identify policy and proposed action in 5 key areas. So legislation and funding. We need to talk to our legislators and say, hey, we need money to do this. Can you give us money for people and policy updates and things as we move forward when we have to update our transportation system plan? We need to come up with guidance and best practices so that when we go to our local jurisdictions, they know what we're talking about. We have to evaluate our current infrastructure. So for example, like I said, we looked at available real estate records and went, oh, the ferry system has some existing real estate that's excess. Could we use that for vertiports? Or there are 4 heliports out in a certain location. Could we use those? We need to evaluate them. Could they accommodate energy infrastructure? Are they big enough to handle an AAM vehicle? So we need to do those sort of very structural evaluations. We also need to talk about agency and community outreach. I think one of the things that we frequently overlook is that communities need to know this is going to happen. But we also need to educate the decision makers who are going to be saying whether or not a vertiport should be allowed in their community. So we need to make sure that our messaging is both accurate and consistent so we can teach jurisdictions and help them reach out to their citizens. So we need to work really hard, and folks like Cami have been doing that for a long time to educate agencies and decision makers. And above all, we need to foster collaboration. So is it possible? Well, we put together a little sort of schedule, and we said, in the next 5 years, we think we can do that. It's going to be hard work, but we think we can do it. And that's pretty much all I have. Again, my name is Lisa Harmon, and if you need to reach me, it's just my name, Lisa, lisa.harmon@meadhunt.com. So you can find me online. But anyway, thanks so much. And I'll leave you with our schedule so you know it's real.
Thank you, Lisa. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to flip to Q&A so we at least have a chance for a few questions. I will leave this up for a second. We have a number of resources on the CAMI website. We also run a 20-hour virtual course for agencies, airports, elected officials. So if you want information, we'll start our next one this fall. If you want information on that, you can go to our website. So, let's see. That's our Urban Air Policy Collaborative is all the agencies and airports that have participated so far, our curriculum. And again, I will put these slides in Whova so that you can access them. I'd like to bring Amelia. Are you still with us? He is. Can you say something so I know you're...
Sorry, I was...
There you are. Perfect. Okay, I'm going down here. Test. Okay, I think Vandana and I are going to go back and forth with some questions. I want to start off with a question to Amelia, but of course it's open to anybody. Amelia, WISC has been working, as you showed, in some other cities. Can you talk a little bit about the use cases and the vision that you see in other places and how they might apply to the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, so I was mentioning that we have announced as launch cities the LA region, Houston, and Miami in the US. If I talk about Houston, for example, and how what's interesting from a use case point of view is it's a region that pretty much has all of them. It's very flat, high growth, distributed, not great public transit. It's not about not very connected and etc. Like a need for other mode of transit and so transportation. And so we do have the commuter that we talk about. Obviously, going to the airport, it's an area that I think something that could be applicable also to you is there are several centers of activity, like areas that really need to be connected to the airport with a lot of flow from downtown, the energy corridor, etc. You have a corporate shuttle use case. You have a lot of companies that are headquartered there that are moving a lot of employees either to the airport or talking about hospital networks. So, in Houston, you have the largest medical center in the world. And we discussing with hospitals, and they're very intrigued about the capability that they would have to move personnel in 15, 20 minutes across the 6 or 7 antennas they have in the region, and how, from an HR point of view, okay, do we need to, where do we need our specialists? Can we be the most efficient in how we distribute our resources also across our hospital networks? Cargo as well, in this region, port tourism. So, when I look at obviously creating an ecosystem, we're not looking at doing a use case in a certain city and the use cases in another. And so when we look at a region is what are the regions where we can stack up as much of these use cases so that as we work with the region, local partners on the infrastructure, that we can really leverage this infrastructure from cargo transport to people transport and all across the use cases, tourism, etc.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? I think we are at time. Are we okay to run a few minutes over? Or do we need to? Oh, okay. If everybody's willing to hang with us for another few minutes, we'll go for a few more questions. Yes. So I'm going to repeat the question. It was, what happened in the last few days? What action did the federal government take that has changed your shares of Joby, which have been underwater for 5 years, to suddenly shoot up?
So part of what I've seen from Joey, if I could answer, is I've been in that same boat. So what? But I think what helped spur that is them actually announcing they were going to be doubling production and some achievements that they've had recently that had a big impact on that. Joby's been doing some testing with hydrogen fuel cells as well. On June 30th, I've seen some spy shots that are circulating around on the internet where they flew out of Pendleton, Oregon for over 9 hours. But what just happened at the federal level is Mosaic just passed. And I read something this morning, actually, that Joby had commented on. And with Mosaic passing, that's a modernization of aviation. It doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on advanced air mobility, but hopefully it spurs aviation, which at the end of the day is good for it. One of the things that I think advanced air mobility has that's interesting is it's going to bring general aviation accessibility to aircraft. Like me as a private pilot, if I want to fly from Chehalis to Skagit Regional or something like that, it will give that sort of mobility to non-pilots. And so that's what's exciting about advanced air mobility. But I think what you've seen just recently with that uptick is related to some other factors that are also positive in the industry.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Sure. The last iteration of the aviation bill was very positive and extremely supportive of advanced air mobility. There have been no direct changes to that. So, of course, all money needs to be allocated in certain areas, but it was very supportive of FAA, who's responsible for certification and many things. So that's a good sign.
Can you speak at all to the hydrogen fuel and how that's being supported at the federal level? Is there anything new on that space?
Anything new on hydrogen? Right now, what I'm seeing just from a lot of people I've been talking to is a lot of uncertainty. But if we look at practicality of applying it to aviation, I think hydrogen has a huge opportunity there, because if we look at the amount of energy per kilogram, which is incredibly important when we're talking about aviation, hydrogen has about 3 times the amount of energy per kilogram. So for us in aviation, I think it has a huge opportunity there. At the federal level, there's some uncertainty right now, but I think as we start to make more of a business case, and this is what I would encourage people to do now, is focus really on the business case of that and the financials of it. That once we get an economy of scale, we can see greater profit margins, greater energy capacity in that fuel, and hydrogen becomes the battery for the aircraft, really. So.
All right, I will. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm just going to repeat it for people online. So the question was about enablers to make this happen, including airspace management and energy connections. Go ahead.
I can start with some of the energy work. I'm mostly familiar with what's going on in California because that's where I live. And even though there's been a sort of a refocusing of energy at the federal level, California specifically has been working very hard to streamline the production or streamline the passage of both electric battery storage for electric power, and also to look at new electrical power sources and battery storage to support hydrogen development. So I think that's really good that we're talking about streamlining process to get to energy production. That's really good. And as an aviation planner, I can also say that I've now when we do master plans at multiple airports, many of them are beginning to look at their electrification sources and saying, in the next 20 years or the next 5 years in the near term, what do I need to do to get more electricity to my airport? Do I have enough for AAM? And where would I put that new battery charging facility on my airport? And it's strange because, 20 years ago, nobody ever thought that solar was like compatible with aviation. And at that time, it really wasn't. But now so many airports are looking at on-site solar production for electricity that it's become part of what we plan for. So I think that's positive. Do you have anything to say about airspace?
As far as airspace goes, one of the things that I'm seeing from a lot of these companies is they're hoping to integrate into existing airspace. So no special changes there. Now, the FAA obviously has their work cut out for them to come up with the rules of how to operate these at a commercial capacity. Because really, if we start thinking about this, the difference between a drone and Whisk Arrow, it's very, like, if I had to define that, I don't know that I could. And so the FAA really has its work cut out for it in trying to figure out how do we get to that next level for certification. I think that those models are absolutely on their way. We know that Whisk is working on autonomy. We know that Joby, they own X-Wing. They're working on autonomy. We know that at the end of the day, there are some real practical components of that, because you can increase your payload, which increases your profit and increases your range and all of those things. So there's a lot of practical application for it. But as far as existing, if they are piloted, they should be able to integrate into the airspace once the aircraft is certified.
I'll just add to that. Of course, airspace management falls under the sole umbrella of the FAA. I think where things have been interesting is watching the growth of the small drone industry. When we talk about AAM, we're primarily thinking about commercial operations, whereas with drones, the drone industry grew out of primarily private, hobbyists. So there's a difference there. But there's going to be some blending. Some of these aircraft are really large drones, whether they're have people or cargo in them. And there's going to be more issues around the low airspace. I think integration into that higher airspace with commercial operations, as Brandon said, is going to be much more seamless than kind of managing some of these low areas. And the FAA certainly is working on that. Yeah.
And I think we might have one final question. Oh. Okay, just so people heard, it's what's the bill number? The reconciliation bill. 45D. I see. So there's an incentive in there. What was the number again? Sorry, the person, $3 a kilogram. Thank you. Yeah, just in case people couldn't hear it.
Yes.
Online.
No, thank you.
$3 a kilogram. Thank you.
So I think we're pushing lunch here. So we'll let you go. I want to thank everybody again. And we will pop, I don't know if all the slides from the sessions are available, but I will at least pop the links to the resources that are on our website, which will include the Washington report whenever it's publicly available.
Yeah.
But it's not yet. Thank you for your participation, and we'll be around if you have questions.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.